I never thought the person who would destroy my life would be sitting across from me at Thanksgiving dinner, carving turkey and asking me to pass the gravy. My name is Jessica Martinez, I'm 28 years old, and I work as a pediatric nurse in Denver, Colorado. For 3 years, I saved every extra penny I earned, living in a studio apartment and eating ramen noodles, all to build my dream of opening a small medical clinic in my hometown. $45,000 sat in my savings account, representing countless double shifts, missed social events, and sacrifices I made for my future. I trusted exactly one person with access to that account in case of emergencies: my older brother, Michael. The same brother who was supposed to protect me growing up, who promised he'd always have my back, and who looked me straight in the eye last month and lied about needing help with a family emergency. What I discovered 3 days ago made my blood run cold, and what I did next changed both of our lives forever. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The first thing I noticed when I opened my banking app was the balance: $0.37. I stared at the screen of my phone, certain there had to be some mistake. I refreshed the app twice, logged out and back in, even restarted my phone entirely. But the number remained the same, mocking me with its finality. My hand started shaking as I scrolled through the transaction history. There it was, clear as day, a wire transfer for $44,999.63, authorized 3 days ago. The recipient was listed as Ems Martinez, with an account number I didn't recognize: Michael. My brother had cleaned out my entire life savings. I sat in my car outside Denver General Hospital, still wearing my scrubs from the night shift, feeling like the world had tilted off its axis. 3 years of 16-hour shifts, 3 years of saying no to dinners with friends, 3 years of wearing the same winter coat with the broken zipper because I couldn't afford a new one. All gone in a single transaction. The clinic I'd planned to open in Pueblo, where I grew up, was supposed to serve families who couldn't afford proper health care. I'd already put down a deposit on a small building on Main Street, right next to the bakery where my grandmother used to buy pan dulce every Sunday morning. The lease was signed, the equipment was ordered, and I'd even hired 2 part-time nurses who were counting on those jobs. Now, all of that was crumbling around me. My phone buzzed with a text message, and for a split second my heart jumped, hoping it was Michael with some explanation that would make this nightmare make sense. Instead, it was my landlord reminding me that rent was due in 2 days. $450 I no longer had. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with questions that felt impossible to answer. How could Michael do this to me? We'd been through everything together after our parents died in a car accident when I was 19 and he was 23. He was the one who held me while I cried at their funeral. He walked me down the aisle when I married David, and he was there again when David and I divorced 2 years later. When I decided to become a nurse, Michael helped me fill out financial aid applications and drove me to interviews when my car broke down. The emergency access I'd given him to my account was supposed to be for situations like medical crises or natural disasters. We'd talked about it extensively when I set it up. I remembered his exact words: "Jess, I would never touch your money unless you were unconscious in a hospital somewhere and needed me to pay your bills." He'd seemed almost offended that I was even asking him to promise such a thing. Back in my apartment, I called the bank immediately. The customer service representative, a woman named Patricia with a voice like warm honey, listened patiently as I explained the situation. But her response crushed what little hope I had left. "I'm sorry, Ms. Martinez, but the transaction was authorized using the proper credentials. Your brother had legitimate access to the account, and the transfer appears to be valid. Without evidence of fraud or coercion, there's nothing we can do to reverse the transaction." "But he stole it," I said, my voice breaking. "He took my entire life savings without permission." "I understand how frustrating this must be," Patricia replied. "But legally speaking, if someone has authorized access to an account, their transactions are considered valid. You would need to pursue this as a civil matter." A civil matter. That meant lawyers, court fees, and months or years of legal battles I couldn't afford. Even if I won, there was no guarantee I'd ever see that money again. After hanging up, I sat on my couch staring at the wall, trying to process what had just happened. The apartment felt smaller than usual, the silence pressing in on me from all sides. I thought about calling my Aunt Rosa, Michael's and my only remaining family, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. How do you tell someone that the nephew they helped raise, the one they still brag about to their church friends, is a thief? Then I remembered something that made my stomach drop even further. Last week, Michael had mentioned something about taking a vacation. He'd called me while I was at work, sounding unusually cheerful, talking about how he'd been working too hard lately and needed to get away. When I asked where he was planning to go, he'd been vague, just mentioning something about tropical beaches and umbrella drinks. I grabbed my laptop and opened Facebook, something I rarely did anymore. Michael's profile loaded, and there it was, posted just 2 hours ago. A photo of him grinning widely on a pristine white sand beach, crystal blue water stretching endlessly behind him. He was wearing designer sunglasses I'd never seen before, and holding what looked like an expensive cocktail. The caption read, "Finally living my best life in the Maldives. Sometimes you just have to treat yourself. Blessed Jarker vacation, Jark paradise." The Maldives. One of the most expensive vacation destinations in the world. The kind of place that costs thousands of dollars per night. The kind of place my brother could never afford on his construction supervisor salary. Unless, of course, he was using someone else's money. I scrolled through his other recent posts. There were photos from the airport showing him in the first-class lounge, pictures of his hotel suite, which looked like something out of a luxury travel magazine, videos of him jet skiing and parasailing, activities that probably cost more per hour than I made in a day as a nurse. My brother was living it up in paradise while I sat in my cramped apartment, trying to figure out how I was going to pay rent, let alone salvage my dreams of opening a clinic. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs and leaving me gasping. But as I stared at those photos, something else began to build alongside the pain and shock, something harder and more determined. Michael thought he was untouchable, probably banking on the fact that I wouldn't pursue legal action or make a scene that might embarrass our family. He was wrong. I had one advantage he didn't know about. 3 months ago, Michael had gotten promoted to senior project manager at Dalton Construction, one of Denver's largest building companies. He'd bragged about his new position, his increased salary, and most importantly, his direct access to the company's financial systems and client accounts. What Michael didn't realize was that stealing money, even from family, might be exactly the kind of behavior his boss would be very interested to learn about. My phone sat on the coffee table. Michael's company directory still bookmarked from when I'd looked up his work number to congratulate him on the promotion. All I had to do was make one call. Growing up in Pueblo, Colorado, Michael and I were inseparable. Our neighborhood sat on the east side of town, where the houses were small but well-maintained, and everyone knew their neighbor's business, whether they wanted to or not. Our father, Roberto Martinez, worked at the steel mill for 37 years, his hands permanently stained with grease no amount of soap could wash away. Our mother, Carmen, cleaned houses for wealthy families in the foothills, coming home each evening exhausted but always finding energy to help us with homework at the kitchen table. Michael was 4 years older than me, which meant he was my protector, my role model, and occasionally, my biggest tormentor. When I was 6 and he was 10, he taught me how to ride a bike by running alongside me in the empty parking lot behind St. Joseph's Catholic Church, never letting go even when I screamed at him to stop pushing. When I was 12 and Tommy Valdez pulled my hair during lunch, Michael cornered him after school and made him apologize in front of half the 7th grade. But even then, there were signs of something different about Michael, something I was too young to understand. He had a way of bending the truth when it suited him, small lies that never seemed to hurt anyone. When he broke Mrs. Chen's garden gnome with his baseball, he convinced our parents that a neighbor's dog must have knocked it over. When he got a C- on his algebra test, he told them the teacher made a grading mistake and promised to get it fixed, then somehow managed to forge a better grade on the report card. Our parents worked constantly but struggled to make ends meet. I remember overhearing hushed conversations about past due notices and difficult choices between fixing the water heater or buying school clothes. Michael seemed to absorb this stress, differently than I did. While I learned to be careful with money, to save every quarter and appreciate what we had, Michael developed what I now recognize as resentment. He would stare at the houses in the wealthy neighborhoods where our mother worked, talking about how unfair it was that some people had swimming pools while we had to share a bathroom. When Michael turned 16, he got his first job bussing tables at Rosario's Mexican restaurant downtown. Instead of saving his paychecks like our parents suggested, he spent every dollar on things that made him look more successful than he was. Designer sneakers that cost more than our monthly grocery budget. A leather jacket he wore even in summer. Heat. He told everyone at school his family was doing better than we actually were, creating elaborate stories about vacations we never took and possessions we never owned. I was 13 when everything changed. It was a Tuesday evening in March, one of those spring days in Colorado where the weather can't decide between winter and summer. Our parents were driving back from grocery shopping when a drunk driver ran a red light and hit them head-on. Mom died instantly. Dad held on for 3 days in intensive care before the doctors told us there was nothing more they could do. Michael was 21 by then, legally old enough to become my guardian. I remember sitting in the social worker's office while they discussed our options. Michael gripped my hand and promised he would take care of me, that we would stay together no matter what. The life insurance policy was modest, enough to cover funeral expenses and leave us with about $15,000 to start over. Those first months were brutal. Michael dropped out of community college and took a full-time job with a local construction crew to support us. I watched him grow up overnight, transforming from a carefree college student to someone who worried about mortgage payments and grocery bills. He made sure I stayed in school, helped me apply for financial aid, and worked extra hours so I could participate in the activities that mattered to me. For a while, it seemed like the tragedy had changed him for the better. He stopped buying expensive things he couldn't afford and started taking responsibility seriously. When I graduated high school and got accepted to nursing school in Denver, he drove me to look at apartments and helped me move my belongings in his beat-up pickup truck. But distance began to change our relationship in ways I didn't expect. Michael started calling less frequently, and when he did call, the conversations felt forced. He began dating a woman named Ashley who worked in real estate and drove a BMW. Suddenly, his social media was filled with photos from expensive restaurants and weekend trips to ski resorts. When I asked how he could afford such things on a construction worker's salary, he became defensive, saying he'd gotten promoted and that I didn't understand how the industry worked. The first time I noticed money missing was 3 years ago, shortly after I'd started working as a nurse. I'd left $40 in cash on my dresser to pay for parking when I visited Pueblo for Christmas. When I went to grab it before leaving, the money was gone. Michael was the only person who had been in my apartment, but when I asked him about it, he seemed genuinely confused and suggested I might have moved it somewhere else. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. 6 months later, my credit card was used to purchase $800 worth of electronics from an online retailer. The billing address was Michael's apartment in Pueblo. When I confronted him, he claimed his identity had been stolen and that someone must have used my card information too. He seemed so concerned and apologetic that I believed him, even helped him file a police report that went nowhere. Looking back now, I can see the pattern that was forming. Michael had developed expensive tastes and a lifestyle that exceeded his income. Rather than scaling back or finding additional legitimate work, he had chosen a different path. He was systematically taking advantage of the trust I'd placed in him, testing boundaries to see how much he could get away with. The emergency account access had been his idea. He'd called me 18 months ago, right after my divorce was finalized, expressing concern about my living alone in Denver without family nearby. What if something happened to me? What if I was in an accident and couldn't handle my own finances? He painted scenarios that seemed reasonable, caring even. It felt like the protective older brother I remembered from childhood was looking out for me again. I should have seen it for what it was, the setup for the biggest theft of all. The first time I really should have confronted Michael was during Thanksgiving last year. I'd driven down to Pueblo to spend the holiday with him and Ashley at their new apartment, a luxury complex on the north side of town that I knew cost at least twice what Michael could afford. The place was immaculate, furnished with leather, sofas and a dining set that looked like it belonged in a showroom. Ashley greeted me at the door wearing a Cartier watch that caught the light every time she moved her wrist. She worked as a real estate agent but specialized in lower-income properties, hardly the type of sales that would justify a $5,000 timepiece. When I complimented it, she laughed and said Michael had surprised her with it for their 6-month anniversary. During dinner, I watched Michael closely. He'd always been charismatic, but there was something different now, a nervous energy that hadn't been there before. He talked constantly about his success at work, dropping names of important clients and describing construction projects worth millions of dollars. According to him, he was practically running Dalton Construction single-handedly. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. The Henderson project alone is bringing in $12 million, he said, cutting into his prime rib with theatrical precision. Mr. Dalton trusts me to handle all the financial coordination. Direct access to client accounts, vendor payments, the whole operation. Ashley beamed at him like he'd just announced he'd won the lottery. But something about the way he emphasized his access to money made my stomach turn. I tried to push the feeling aside, telling myself I was being unnecessarily suspicious. Red flags became harder to ignore after Christmas. Michael started calling me more frequently, but the conversations had an agenda I couldn't quite identify. He would ask detailed questions about my work schedule, when I planned to take vacation, days, and whether I had any major expenses coming up. At the time, I thought he was just being a caring brother, checking in on my financial stability. In February, he asked to borrow $2,000 for what he claimed was a car repair emergency. His truck had supposedly broken down, and he needed it fixed immediately to get to work. I transferred the money the same day, telling him to pay me back whenever he could. 3 weeks later, I saw photos on Ashley's Instagram of them at a ski resort in Aspen, Michael wearing brand new snowboarding gear that cost more than the money he'd borrowed from me. When I asked him about it, he became defensive. Ashley's company paid for the trip, he snapped. It was a work retreat, and my truck is fine now, thanks for asking. But his explanation didn't add up. Ashley worked for a small real estate firm in Pueblo, not the kind of company that sent employees on luxury ski trips. The lies became more elaborate and frequent. In March, he called crying, saying Ashley's father had been hospitalized and they needed money for medical bills. I sent another $1,500 without hesitation. 2 days later, Ashley posted photos from a wine tasting tour in Napa Valley, tagged with locations at resorts I couldn't afford even for a single night. My coworker Sarah noticed my mood changing. We'd been friends since nursing school, and she had a way of reading people that made her an excellent pediatric nurse. During a break between shifts in April, she cornered me in the hospital cafeteria. "Jess, you've been distracted for months," she said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Every time your phone rings, you look like you're expecting bad news. What's going on?" I found myself telling her everything. The mysterious expenses, the lavish trips, the borrowed money that never got repaid. Sarah listened without judgment, but when I finished, her expression was grim. "Honey, your brother is using you," she said gently. "I've seen this pattern before with my own family. Someone gets access to easy money and starts living beyond their means. It always escalates." I wanted to defend Michael, to explain that he was just going through a rough patch or that Ashley was a bad influence. But deep down, I knew Sarah was right. The brother who had once worked double shifts to keep food on our table was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. The breaking point came in early May. Michael called during one of my shifts, sounding panicked. He claimed his construction crew had been robbed at a job site, and several workers were threatening to quit unless they received immediate compensation for stolen tools. He needed $5,000 right away to keep the project from falling apart. "If this job fails, I'll lose everything," he said, his voice shaking. "Mr. Dalton is already questioning my management abilities. Please, Jess, I'll pay you back with interest as soon as the insurance claim goes through." Something about the story felt rehearsed, but the desperation in his voice seemed genuine. Against my better judgment, I transferred the money. Later that evening, I called Dalton Construction directly to ask if they needed any additional support for their employees after the robbery. The receptionist seemed confused. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we haven't had any incidents like that recently," she said. "All our job sites have been running smoothly this month." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, finally accepting what I'd been trying to deny for months. Michael wasn't borrowing money from me. He was stealing it, using elaborate lies and emotional manipulation to fund a lifestyle he couldn't afford. The emergency access to my savings account suddenly took on a sinister new meaning. I started monitoring my account obsessively, checking the balance multiple times a day. Every time my phone buzzed with a notification from my banking app, my heart would race. I knew something was coming, some final act that would cross a line we couldn't come back from. The worst part was the isolation. I couldn't talk to anyone about my suspicions without admitting that I'd been enabling Michael's behavior for months. How do you tell people that the person you trusted most in the world has been systematically robbing you blind? 3 weeks later, I would discover just how far Michael was willing to go. The call came at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday. I was deep in sleep after pulling a brutal 12-hour shift in the pediatric ICU when my phone started buzzing insistently on the nightstand. Groggy and disoriented, I fumbled for it, expecting to hear from the hospital about an emergency. Instead, I heard Michael's voice, slurred and barely coherent. Music pounded in the background, and I could hear what sounded like waves crashing against a shore. Jesse, you'll never guess where I am," he shouted over the noise. "Michael, where are you? It's 3 in the morning. I'm in paradise, baby sister. Living the dream." He laughed, a sound that chilled me to the bone. "Ashley and I are at this incredible resort. You should see this place. Private beach, infinity pool, butler service. This is how the other half lives." My mouth went dry. "What resort?" "Michael, how are you paying for this?" "Don't worry about money," he said, his words slurring together. "I figured it all out. Sometimes you have to take risks to get what you deserve, you know? Mom and Dad never understood that. They were content being poor." The line went dead. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, replaying every word of that conversation. The casual dismissal of our parents, the drunken arrogance, the complete lack of concern about money when I knew he'd been borrowing from me for months. Something was terribly wrong. I couldn't fall back asleep. At 6 a.m., I gave up trying and drove to the hospital early, hoping work would distract me from the growing dread in my stomach. But concentration was impossible. Every time I tried to focus on patient charts or medication schedules, Michael's voice echoed in my head. I figured it all out. During my lunch break, I called Ashley's office, hoping to get some clarity about their trip. The receptionist at Pueblo Premier Realty sounded surprised when I asked to speak with her. "Ashley Rodriguez? She requested emergency family leave 3 days ago. Said her grandmother in Mexico was dying and she needed to fly out immediately for the funeral. She's supposed to be back next Monday." My blood turned to ice. Ashley's grandmother had supposedly died 2 years ago. I remembered because Michael had used her funeral as an excuse to miss my birthday dinner. Now she was dying again, conveniently, providing cover for a luxury vacation. That evening, I made a decision that would haunt me. I drove to Michael's apartment complex, using the spare key he'd given me months earlier for emergencies. His place was empty, as expected, but what I found there made my hands shake. Credit card statements were scattered across his kitchen table, each one showing a balance in the thousands. Designer clothing with tags still attached filled his closet, price tags revealing purchases that totaled more than I made in 3 months. But the most damning evidence was a printed email confirmation sitting on his desk. The Meridian Resort in the Maldives, 7 nights in an overwater villa. Total cost, $38,000, paid in full 3 days ago. I sank into his desk chair, staring at that confirmation email until the numbers blurred. $38,000 for a single week's vacation. Money he absolutely did not have unless... My phone was already in my hand, banking app loading with painful slowness. "Please," I whispered to myself. "Please let there be a mistake." But there wasn't. My account balance showed exactly what I'd discovered. That morning, 37 cents. The transfer had happened while I was at work, processed automatically through the emergency access I'd stupidly granted him. The room started spinning. 3 years of saving, 3 years of sacrifice, 3 years of building toward my dream of opening a clinic for underserved families. Gone. Stolen by the person I trusted most in the world to fund a vacation that cost more than most people made in a year. I called Michael immediately, my fingers trembling as I dialed. The phone rang once before going straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. He was screening my calls. "Michael, I know what you did," I said to his voicemail, my voice barely steady. "I know about the money. I know about the resort. Call me back immediately." Hours passed with no response. I tried Ashley's phone with the same result. They had stolen my life savings and then disappeared to paradise, probably laughing about how easy it had been to fool trusting little Jessica. At midnight, unable to sleep or think straight, I did something I'd never done before. I started researching Michael's employer online, diving deep into Dalton Construction's website, employee directory, and recent projects. What I found there made my blood run cold. Michael's position gave him direct access to client escrow accounts, vendor payments, and project budgets. He was essentially handling other people's money all day, every day. If he was willing to steal from his own sister, what was stopping him from stealing from his company? I found articles about construction companies that had been destroyed by employee embezzlement. Millions of dollars vanishing from client accounts, small businesses bankrupted when their contractors stole project funds, families losing their homes because someone like Michael decided he deserved their money more than they did. A new kind of anger began building in my chest, different from the personal betrayal I felt about my stolen savings. This was righteous fury. Michael wasn't just hurting me anymore. He was in a position to destroy innocent people's lives, and based on his recent behavior, I had every reason to believe he was already doing exactly that. The resort confirmation email was still in my hand. $38,000 for 7 nights of luxury, while hardworking families trusted him with their life savings. The math was simple and damning. By morning, I had made my decision. Michael had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He'd shown me exactly who he really was, and now I was going to show him what happened when you underestimated Jessica Martinez. I picked up my phone and began scrolling through the Dalton Construction directory until I found the number I was looking for: CEO and President Jonathan Dalton. The secretary who answered at Dalton Construction had a crisp, professional voice that made me second-guess my decision for a split second. "Dalton Construction, this is Margaret speaking. How may I help you?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I need to speak with Mr. Jonathan Dalton immediately. It's regarding financial irregularities involving one of your senior project managers." There was a pause. "May I ask who's calling and what this concerns specifically?" "My name is Jessica Martinez. I'm calling about my brother, Michael Martinez, and I have evidence that he's been stealing money. I believe your company and your clients may be at risk." Another pause, longer this time. "Please hold. I'm transferring you directly to Mr. Dalton." The hold music was classical, something peaceful that contrasted sharply with the storm raging in my chest. Within 30 seconds, a deep male voice came on the line. "This is Jonathan Dalton. Ms. Martinez, Margaret tells me you have concerns about Michael Martinez. Can you be more specific?" His tone was measured but alert. I could hear the scratch of a pen on paper in the background. "Mr. Dalton, my brother stole $45,000 from my personal savings account to pay for a luxury vacation in the Maldives. He's been systematically lying about financial emergencies and living far beyond his means for months. Given his position handling your company's client accounts, I thought you should know immediately." Silence stretched between us. When Mr. Dalton spoke again, his voice had changed completely. "Ms. Martinez, I need you to stay on the line. Margaret is going to transfer you to our conference room phone. I'm bringing in our head of security and our chief financial officer. Can you repeat everything you just told me, but with more detail?" Within minutes, I found myself speaking to 3 people whose voices carried the weight of serious concern. I told them everything: the borrowed money that never got repaid, the lies about work emergencies, Ashley's fake family crisis, the resort confirmation I'd found, and Michael's drunken call from paradise. "What's the exact name of the resort?" asked a woman who identified herself as Linda Chen, the CFO. "The Meridian Resort in the Maldives." The confirmation showed a payment of $38,000 made 3 days ago. I heard rapid typing, then a sharp intake of breath. "Mr. Dalton?" Linda's voice was tight with alarm. 3 days ago, we processed a vendor payment to Meridian International Services for $38,000. It was authorized by Michael Martinez for supposed concrete delivery to the Henderson project. The silence that followed was deafening. "There is no Meridian International Services in our vendor database," said the security head, whose name was Tom Rodriguez. "And the Henderson project uses exclusively local suppliers. We've never had any vendor named Meridian anything." My stomach dropped. Michael hadn't just stolen from me. He'd stolen from his company, using his access to client accounts to fund his vacation, while making it look like a legitimate business expense. How many other payments has he authorized recently? Mr. Dalton's voice was deadly calm. More typing. Then Linda's voice, shakier now. 17 transactions in the past 6 months, all to vendors I don't recognize. Total amount. She paused, and I could hear her calculator clicking. $214,000. The number hit like a physical blow. $214,000. Michael hadn't just taken my life savings. He'd been systematically embezzling from his company for months, possibly putting entire construction projects at risk and stealing money that belonged to families building their dream homes. "Ms. Martinez," Mr. Dalton said, "I need to ask you something crucial. Is your brother aware that you've discovered the theft from your personal account?" I left him a voicemail last night saying I knew what he'd done, but he hasn't responded. He's still in the Maldives. Good. Don't contact him again. Tom, I want airport security notified immediately. The moment Michael Martinez sets foot on American soil, I want him detained. Linda, freeze all his access to our systems right now. Everything. I heard rapid keyboard clicking. Done, Linda said. All his login credentials are suspended. He can't access any accounts, authorize any payments, or even enter the building. What happens now? I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. Now we call the FBI, Mr. Dalton said grimly. What your brother has done constitutes federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and theft of funds from federally insured accounts. This isn't just a family dispute anymore, Ms. Martinez. This is a federal crime that could send him to prison for decades. Tom Rodriguez's voice cut in. We'll need you to provide a formal statement about the personal theft. Your testimony will be crucial in establishing a pattern of behavior. There's something else, Linda added, her voice grim. The Henderson project he's been stealing from? It's a low-income housing development, affordable homes for first-time buyers. Michael Martinez has been stealing money meant to help working families buy their first houses. The full weight of Michael's crimes crashed over me. He hadn't just betrayed me personally. He'd betrayed vulnerable families, honest contractors, and a company that had trusted him with their most sensitive financial operations. The brother who had once protected me from bullies had become the kind of person who stole from families just trying to build a better life. We'll coordinate with local authorities in the Maldives, Tom continued. He won't be able to hide behind umbrella drinks and ocean views much longer. As I hung up the phone 20 minutes later, after providing detailed statements and contact information, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and heartbreak. Justice was coming for Michael, swift and federal. But the brother I'd grown up, loving, the one who'd held my hand at our parents' funeral, was gone forever. My phone buzzed with a text message. For one wild moment, I thought it might be Michael, finally ready to face what he'd done. Instead, it was a photo from Ashley's Instagram, posted just minutes earlier. Michael was lounging poolside in designer swim trunks, holding an expensive cocktail, sunglasses reflecting the tropical paradise around him. The caption read, "Living our best life. Some people work their whole lives and never get to experience luxury like this. Blessed Nar vacation. Deserve the best life." He had no idea that his best life was about to become his worst nightmare. The first call came at 6:47 a.m., 2 days after my conversation with Dalton Construction. I was getting ready for work when my phone rang with an unknown number displaying a Colorado area code I didn't recognize. Jessica Martinez? The voice was crisp, official. Yes, this is Jessica. This is Agent Sarah Williams with the Denver FBI field office. We have Michael Martinez in custody at Denver International Airport. He was detained upon arrival this morning on federal charges of wire fraud and embezzlement. We'll need you to Come in for a formal interview regarding the personal theft you reported. My knees went weak. After days of wondering when the other shoe would drop, it finally had. Michael was back on American soil, and his paradise vacation had ended in handcuffs. Is Ashley with him? I asked. Ashley Rodriguez was also detained. She's being questioned separately about her knowledge of the fraudulent activities. 3 hours later, I sat in a sterile FBI conference room, providing detailed testimony to Agent Williams and her partner, Agent David Park. They were thorough, professional, and surprisingly compassionate as I walked them through months of manipulation and lies. Your brother's scheme was more sophisticated than we initially realized, Agent Williams explained, sliding a folder across the table. He created fake vendor profiles in the company system, complete with fabricated business licenses and banking information. The $38,000 he used for your vacation was just one of 17 fraudulent transactions. Agent Park leaned forward. What makes this case particularly strong is that he got greedy. Instead of stealing smaller amounts over a longer period, he accelerated the timeline when he wanted to fund his lifestyle. That pattern of escalation is what allowed us to track everything so quickly. The folder contained printed bank records, wire transfer confirmations, and screenshots from Michael's social media accounts. Seeing his vacation photos presented as evidence in a federal case gave me a surreal sense of closure. What happens now? I asked. Your brother is being held without bail, Agent Williams said. Given the amount stolen and the sophistication of the fraud, he's looking at federal charges that carry a potential sentence of 15 to 20 years. The state is also filing charges for the theft from your personal account. A week later, Tom Rodriguez from Dalton Construction called with an unexpected update. Jessica, I wanted you to know that Mr. Dalton has made a decision regarding the stolen funds. Because your testimony was instrumental in exposing the full scope of your brother's crimes, the company is prepared to reimburse you for your personal losses. I nearly dropped the phone. What do you mean? $45,000. The amount your brother stole from your savings account. Mr. Dalton considers it a whistleblower reward. Without your call, we might not have discovered the embezzlement until much more damage was done. The check arrived by courier the next day. $45,000 made out to Jessica Martinez, with a note from Jonathan Dalton. For your courage in doing the right thing, even when it meant betraying family loyalty. Your integrity saved our company and protected our clients. But the money, while life-changing, wasn't the most important outcome. 3 weeks after Michael's arrest, I received a call from Maria Santos, a single mother whose dream of buying her first home had been threatened by Michael's theft from the Henderson Project. Ms. Martinez, the FBI told me you were the one who reported the missing money. Because of you, my family didn't lose our house deposit. We're closing on our home next month. That call was followed by others. Families who had been unknowingly victimized by Michael's greed, small contractors who would have been blamed for cost overruns caused by his theft, honest Dalton Construction employees whose jobs had been saved by the early discovery of the embezzlement. With my savings restored and the clinic dream back on track, I drove to Pueblo to sign the lease on the building I'd originally chosen. Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who owned the property, greeted me with warm coffee and fresh pastries. I'm so glad you're still interested, mija, she said, using the affectionate term my mother had favored. This neighborhood needs someone who cares about helping people, not just making money. As I signed the lease papers, I thought about the difference between Michael's version of success and what I was trying to build. He had stolen from vulnerable families to fund a fantasy lifestyle that lasted exactly 7 days. I was investing in a clinic that would serve my community for decades. 6 months later, Lavender Community Health opened its doors. The clinic was small but efficient, staffed with 2 part-time nurses and a physician assistant who shared my vision of accessible healthcare. On opening day, I stood in the waiting room, filled with families from my old neighborhood, and felt something I hadn't experienced since childhood. The unshakable certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. Michael was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Ashley received 5 years for her role in the conspiracy. I never visited him, never responded to the letters he sent from county jail before sentencing. Some relationships, once broken, can't be repaired, but some things can be rebuilt. Every ITAR morning when I unlock the clinic doors, I think about the choice between taking from others and building something meaningful. Michael chose theft and ended up in a cage. I chose service and found freedom. The last text message I ever received from Michael came the day before his sentencing. It was simple. "I'm sorry, Jess. I know you'll never forgive me, but I need you to know I'm sorry," I never replied. Some apologies come too late, and some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness. But as I watched families receive care they couldn't afford elsewhere, I realized that the best revenge against someone who tried to destroy your dreams is proving that some dreams are stronger than any theft. Michael took my money, but he couldn't take my purpose. In the end, that made all the difference. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe. And hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.